Hello and welcome to episode 164 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today's episode, Now You See Me. What does that mean? I'll tell you in just a second. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Omnipod. With just two components, the small wearable pod and the handheld personal diabetes manager, the Omnipod insulin management system lets you manage insulin delivery simply and discreetly. More convenient than daily insulin injections and more comfortable than traditional tube pumps. The Omnipod enables you to live life more freely. You'll learn more in this episode, or you can go to myomnipod.com/juicebox for a free no-obligation demo right now. There's also links in the show notes. The podcast is also brought to you today by Dexcom, makers of the G6 continuous glucose monitor. We've been using G6 for about a week and a half now. I'll have a very comprehensive review episode coming up in about another week. Something to look forward to, huh? Anyway, the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor, which is a fantastic way to manage the ups and downs of your diabetes. You can learn more at dexcom.com/juicebox in the ads later in the podcast. Links in your show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com. Now, we're going to talk to Sean Busby. Sean is a professional snowboarder, which is actually a thing. And his life it's a bit insane. He's also living with two autoimmune issues, and that's why he's on today to talk about lupus and type 1 diabetes. You can hear Basil snortling in the background. Basil, do you want to make any noises? No, not now? Fine. On to the show. There we go. Say something, would you?
Testing. Hello. Perfect.
I was going to say, finally, someone who's used Skype before, you called me. Most people just don't even know how it works. So they're like, what is Skype? I was like, I know, but it's still the best way to do this stuff. So I don't know what to tell you. Well, you sound crystal clear, so that's perfect.
Perfect. Awesome.
Allow me to remind you right here that nothing you hear on the Juicebox podcast should ever be considered advice, medical, or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making changes to your diabetes plan or really doing anything. In general, don't listen to me. I'm an idiot on a podcast. I mean, didn't your parents teach you to be, scared of strangers?
I'm Sean Busby. I'm a professional snowboarder living with type 1 diabetes and lupus.
Sean, I think we've never met in person, but I think we've been in the same place a couple of times, and we just wouldn't know it. I feel like I was at something in Philadelphia once you might have been at, or something at Lilly. I don't remember exactly, but I feel like I've been in a situation where people are like, that's Sean, and I'm like, oh, and then I just get whisked in a different direction, and I don't think we've ever actually met in person, so it is very nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.
So we're here today to talk about something that riding on insulin is doing called Now You See Me, right? And that's what's the hashtag supposed to be doing?
Yeah, so the hashtag for this campaign during the month of May is called Now You See Me. So just completely spelled out, but that's the hashtag. You nailed it.
And we're trying to draw attention to people who are living with multiple autoimmune issues?
Correct. So we know that there's a study that about 27% of people that have type 1 diabetes will develop another autoimmune disease at some point in their lifetime. So I was one of those, and the reason we chose May for this campaign is because, like I said, I have lupus in addition to my type 1 diabetes, and lupus is pretty rare for men to get. About 1 in 10 people that get lupus are men.
Wow.
There's about a total of 500,000 people or 500,000 men in the world that have it. And so I felt pretty alone when I got that diagnosis. And unlike type 1 diabetes, at first I felt alone, but then I found a great community in type 1.
Yeah.
The type 1 community is pretty large and open, and there's people talking about it, but not so much with lupus, at least with men and with lupus. So I figured, I bet I'm not the only one that's going through a double diagnosis. And anyway, so we chose May because May is also Lupus Awareness Month. So we just figured, this is a great time to start this, and let's see who else is dealing with a double diagnosis or possibly more.
around here, when we donate like clothes and things like household goods that, to organizations, we always use the Lupus Foundation because I just one day found myself thinking, how unlucky is it to get a disease that some people will tell you doesn't exist? Like, that's not good luck. Actually, Sean, you have the worst good luck in the world. You got something hardly anybody ever gets and something hardly anybody ever gets at the same time. You must not play the lottery. You're probably just like, well, it's never gonna go the right way for me. But seriously, I mean, you got screwed twice, man. I mean,
yeah. No, actually, it's funny because I've always spoken about that. It's like, man, why don't we play the lottery? Because the odds are looking like it's in our favor. So
you always hit the low odds stuff, right? Like, so that's Well, I'll say this, Sean. So I don't think I've ever come out and said this on the podcast yet, but now seems like just as good a time as any. My daughter Arden is just about 14 years old. She's had type 1 since she was 2, and a number of months ago now, a while ago, I've alluded to it once or twice, but she started having really intense stomach issues, and she would not use the bathroom for days at a time successfully. And then when she went, it was her body just being like, oh my God, all this has to come out, like really like a bad cycle she was in. And we came up on her endocrinologist appointment, and I walked in and I said, look, I'm sorry to say this, but you're going to have to test her thyroid. I'm like, because I think her thyroid's like kind of gone, Yeah. And sure enough, now she has to take Synthroid every day, and it completely cleared things up. But it just, that's, like you think, wow, one thing's enough. But to make your point, there it is. There's the second thing. And looking back, it's not that surprising. My wife has hyperthyroidism, and we go back through my wife's family line, and most of the women on my wife's side of the family have some endocrine issue. They're all different, but one person has celiac. My wife's grandmother had the celiac. We have a niece who just has like not a great immune system. Like everyone seems to be a little touched by it, and Arden got too, it looks like. So. And it stinks, but finding out right away and doing something about it took her from being miserable to being right back. I can't tell you, that Synthroid was in her for 2-3 days, and everything was back to normal again.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to know what that enemy is, to have a face at least.
Tell me a little bit about lupus, because I'm kind of fascinated by it, but don't really know anything about it. How does it present?
Yeah, so it's a super complicated disease. They refer to it as the cruel mystery, just because it mimics so many diseases. It mimics multiple sclerosis. It can affect your muscles and mimic forms of like a muscular kind of dystrophy or myositis. For me, they suspected it actually when I was 19 years old, and then I was sent out, or I guess when I was about 20 years old, and I was sent out to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota for 2 weeks. However, during that time, and just let me ask, are you still getting good connection with me? Because I just got something on my phone that said poor connection.
You sound great to me, so I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Good.
So anyways, I was sent out to Mayo Clinic, and at the time I had severe hives over about 70% of my body. So I was being treated with some steroids called prednisone, which, if anyone knows, prednisone is super gnarly if you have type 1 diabetes. It's crazy to try to keep control of your blood sugars during that time.
Right.
And in addition, prednisone is also one of the major drugs that's used to treat lupus and suppress the immune system. So anyways, I get out there, and when you're on prednisone, it can basically mask the symptoms of lupus and the blood work.
Okay.
And that's essentially kind of what happened, is what the doctors thought. And but I was put through a barrage of tests over 2 weeks. I was tested for Addison's disease. I was tested for MS, all sorts of different complicated autoimmune diseases. And the doctors at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota just said, you most likely have a connective tissue disease based on your lab results and everything we've been seeing. However, it's just not showing its face. It'll probably show itself in 10 years. Well, with lupus, it takes the average person with lupus about 6 years to get a diagnosis. Anyways, I had just returned from a snowboarding expedition in the Arctic Circle. And when I got back, I had these extreme headaches. And I've never had headaches before. And these headaches made me feel like I was going to have like a seizure. They were just so painful. And then on top of that, I had developed a rash across my face, across my chest and back. And then I had also developed some sores in my mouth. And I was also really sore. But I couldn't tell if I was sore because I'm so active and just thinking that was normal, or if it was something else. Speed it up a little, and I went to my doctors, and she ran some lab work. The lab work came back. It showed that my muscle enzymes were extremely high and out of range, and my doctor was suspecting a myositis, or like sort of a kind of a dystrophy style disease of the muscles. And so then I was sent to a neurologist. A neurologist conducted tests, and that neurologist ran some various antibody tests, and a bunch of my I had a bunch of antibodies, like an anti-nuclear antibody, which is kind of like a screening factor for lupus. And so the anti-nuclear antibody, that came back super high and positive, but that's been high and positive since I was 19 years old and when I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Now, what I've been told is that an ANA just shows that an anti-nuclear antibody just shows that there's an autoimmune response going on, and I have type 1 diabetes, so it's probably positive because of that. Well, anyways, in addition to that, another test came back positive, which is kind of like the gold standard. Like, thankfully, it was positive, so we could catch it.
Right.
But it's called an anti-double-stranded DNA, and what that means is that you produce antibodies against your double-stranded DNA. So essentially, your body is just making antibodies against its own cells and blood, and that is a hallmark. Basically kind of a hallmark diagnosis of lupus, so systemic lupus, so SLE. And
can I jump in for a second? I just have to ask you a question. So you say a lot of things that people don't say. Like, I was at the Arctic Circle snowboarding, and that's not I've never heard anybody use that sentence before in my entire life. And everything that's happening to you, like, there's something about your, like, what. Let me just go back for a second. How old were you when you were diagnosed with type 1?
I was diagnosed at 19.
Okay, so 19, and then all this just starts at once for you.
Correct.
How did you live at home at that point? Or you just out in the, like, you live a life that I think most of us don't understand. Like, you just asked me if you could still hear. I'm assuming that's because you're like on the end of a flagpole on the top of a mountain trying to get reception or something like that right now.
I'm actually, and do let me know if you can't hear, because for some reason my phone keeps telling me poor connection. But I'm actually in Alaska right now, and but. Yeah, I
see. That's my point. Yeah. So were you that guy when you were 19? Were you in Alaska when you were 19, kind of, or were you at home, like, going, maybe I'll go to college, maybe I'll snowboard in the Arctic Circle? Where were you at your life at that point?
When I was 19, snowboarding was my life, and I was living in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and my parents live in Southern California. And but I was full-time training. I was competing and just traveling the world for snowboarding competitions. And so yeah, being diagnosed at 19, my life just kind of totally turned upside down, and I was very confused and very scared about what that meant.
How did you prioritize things? Did you see the diabetes as, okay, this is first, or was the pain first, or was the, like, what did you see as your biggest foe in the morning?
With lupus?
No, but just in general. If you type 1, you've just gotten it. You probably don't know a ton about it at that point. You're trying to be incredibly active. Now somebody's telling you have a different disease on top of that. When you wake up in the morning, like, what's the first thing you think about?
The first thing I actually think about when I wake up is anything hurting?
Okay.
And so I would say it's primarily focused on lupus. Lupus is very, like, if I overdid something from the day before, it can cause a flare in the disease to become active or come out of remission. I'm also, with that, I'm highly allergic to sunlight. So that can cause it. So that's the one thing is I'm still learning it. It's not like I can go and, test my blood and be like, okay, my lupus is extremely active and I need to do this. So I usually, that's kind of the first thing. Yeah. However, if I'm wearing my CGM, then I may get to jumpstart with type 1 diabetes in the morning, depending on if I'm getting any sort of alarms. So that's kind of nice too.
Yeah. You have an incredible attitude, first of all. The first thing I would do if I felt pain was stop snowboarding. And so you must really love it, first of all. Actually, in my opinion, anyone who would go out in the cold and do anything really loves what they're doing, because I can't wrap my head around being in the cold even. So you're like a complete anomaly to me, which is fantastic. Boom, here comes the ad. What do you want to do first? Dexcom or Omnipod? Want to flip a coin? Hold on. Heads or tails? Heads is Omnipod. Is that a face? It was heads. Omnipod. Hey! Whoever said this podcast wasn't well thought out. Listen to me right now. I'm going to say some things that make a lot of sense to you and to me and to sense in general. Common sense. Would you rather be tied to something or not tied to something? I heard you vote. You said not tied to something. The Omnipod does not have tubing. Do you understand what that means? It means that you're wearing your insulin pump. You're getting your insulin, but you're not attached to another device that has to hang on your belt, be stuffed in your bra, jam down your pants. I don't know what you do with it even. You bounce it on your head and then put a cap on over top of it? I don't know what to do with it, because I've never had that problem, because my daughter has never had that issue. We've always used Omnipod, the tubeless insulin pump of the gods. I can make that claim because no one can prove otherwise. Zeus uses an Omnipod. Zeus, leader of the gods, has type 1 diabetes, uses Omnipod. There, I said it. That's 100% true. Prove me wrong. I'm just kidding. Go to myomnipod.com/juicebox. When you do that, you can start a free, no obligation demo pod. They'll send it to you and you can actually wear it and see what you think. You can see that what I'm talking about is 100% true. And then you just move forward very simply in the process, and Omnipod helps you along the way. I actually had an Omnipod customer service experience yesterday that I'm going to tell you about. I'm going to extend the music to tell you about it. So we just had a job change here, and we switched health insurance. And very luckily, I felt like we upgraded our health insurance a little bit. And maybe we wouldn't have to use a third party anymore to buy our durable medical goods, which turns out we don't have to. But all I did was call Omnipod, and I was like, hey, we just switched insurance. I used to use this third-party supplier. I was wondering, can I use you now? Can I just buy them directly from you? And they said, give me your information. That took a couple seconds. Then they said, we'll call you back in a couple days. And you know what they did? They actually called me back. Crazy, right? Guy calls up and he says, hey, I'm calling from Omnipod. We checked through your insurance. Everything's great. Here's what your coverage is. When would you like to place your first order? Just like that. I mean, it was so simple. And I'm telling you that if that was that simple, just the process of getting the no obligation, non-functioning demo pod to try and check out, it's got to be the easiest thing in the world. I know so many of you have done it, and you get back to me later and you're like, hey, I tried out the demo pod, and now I'm using the Omnipod. And by the way, I appreciate that. Appreciate when you click on the link. Click on the link in the show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com and you try the demo pod. Thank you very much. I'm just saying I think it's going to be really easy. If my experience is any indication, there's really no muss, no fuss. Give it a try. myomnipod.com/juicebox with the links in your show notes and at juiceboxpodcast.com. I really believe that you will love using the Omnipod insulin management system. you open your eyes, I'm not in pain, good day, check my blood sugar, get moving. But then, like, I hope you take this the right way, but when somebody tells me they're a professional snowboarder, I can't wrap my brain around what that means or how you have food. So, like, what is a day like? What is a day like for you being a professional snowboarder?
So yeah, that it's basically consists of and I also now am the executive director of Riding on Insulin, which is a nonprofit that I started right when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 19. But as a snowboarder, that I've been a professional snowboarder since about the age of like 16. Mm-hmm. It's basically communicating with my sponsors that pay me to do what I do. Figuring out trips, pitching different sorts of trips or expeditions that I may do to remote mountain ranges, and then also trying to get kind of marketing materials around that. So you're shooting photos, you're shooting video, you're writing articles for snowboard publications and magazines. We're testing gear that will be coming out from for the following season or 2 seasons from now. So a bunch of the gear that we usually have will be out in the next season or the season after. Okay. And just kind of always providing feedback. So
not much different than when I hear about somebody making like money playing video games. You're the out front face for the activity and for the people who make gear or like that kind of stuff around that activity.
Yeah, that's it. I guess that's a good way to put it.
That's cool. Okay. Well, wow. I wish someone would have told me about that when I was in high school. I would have not done what I did, to be perfectly honest, because your life sounds much cooler. And so also, you are, I'm assuming by now people listening are going to have the same thought as I just did, but you're a go-getter. Like, is that just kind of burned into who you are? I mean, you're like, I have diabetes, I'll start an organization. Not many people's minds work that way, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of things shaped me. Well, actually, a lot of things did shape me. When I was just a snowboarder and I didn't have type 1 diabetes, mm-hmm. my focus was just solely, it was selfish. It was just focused on my sport. Mm-hmm. And I think, with being any sort of athlete, you're typically just, you want to go. You always are setting goals and you're trying to achieve those goals. When I was diagnosed, I was actually misdiagnosed. I was misdiagnosed with type 2, and I became extremely ill and extremely sick for 3 months until I got the correct diagnosis of type 1. And like when I was in the hospital for 12 days, I lost over 30 pounds of my body weight. I started losing snowboarding sponsors because they didn't want to support an athlete that was chronically sick. So like while my teammates were going and competing in South America, I was essentially just like in a hospital or back home with my parents being taken care of because I couldn't function because I wasn't on insulin. And but once I got that correct diagnosis of type 1 and got on insulin and felt how amazing that feeling of having my first insulin shot was, then it really grounded me. And then I had to learn about this disease, and all I found was, again, that community. I was reading stories on the JDRF website during Children's Congress of 5-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 16-year-olds, like how they've lived life with type 1 diabetes and have known no different, and how they still go out, follow their goals and their dreams, and are being a normal kid. And that's what inspired me, and it showed me if they could do it, then surely so could I. And so they were my driving motivation. And I know for a fact that if I got diagnosed with lupus, and because of the lack of community, and now maybe other people would argue there's communities online and all that sort of stuff, but in terms of men and like a positive community, because mm-hmm. a lot of stuff you read about online are the really sad stories. Right. And like a great example is Selena Gomez. She has lupus. She just got a kidney transplant because of it. And so like it's like those sort of stories that you read. And it just showed me, man, that these kids can do it. I can. And if I was diagnosed with lupus first, I would be a complete wreck. I know for a fact I wouldn't be snowboarding.
Because you think you would have reached out into the world and found sad stories, and those sad stories would have led you towards believing this was your path, but instead you reached out, found type 1 people who have a different message in the community. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
It's amazing.
And there's just the community is so strong around type 1, and I just hope that's the same for many other diseases, because like I said, many people living with type 1, like your daughter, are going to develop another autoimmune disease. But I do really feel like type 1 set me up with the right tools of managing a chronic illness, and with the amount of people I could reach out to and get support in that manner. So when I was diagnosed with another chronic illness, I had the blueprint of how to manage such a thing.
Yeah, there's sort of this moment like out of a bad like sci-fi action movie where you're being attacked by flying gorillas, and then then dragons come up out of the water, and you're just like, oh, this too. There's that feeling of like, okay, I guess I'll defeat all of this as it comes at me. And I really do think that it goes unsaid sometimes, and it's hard to properly, I think, articulate at times for some people, but you definitely don't want diabetes. You don't want everything that comes with it. But there's this positive part about having it that you can't deny. Like this, I don't know, like you don't meet people who have type 1 who aren't, resilient and resourceful and, intelligent and thoughtful about their life and their health. And it does something to you having this disease, and most of it sucks, but some of it's incredibly positive. I don't know if I've ever said this here once, but my daughter plays softball, but she's a third baseman, and they get involved in this game a couple of years ago where they run out of pitching, and she's like, well, I can throw a ball underhand, I'll do it. And so she gets in, pitches to this girl who's like 9 times her size. Like we could have hidden Arden inside of the batter if we needed to. And she lines the ball right back to Arden. Arden can't quite get her glove on it, hits her below the kneecap, knocks her right over. And, the coach goes running out on the field, and I was like, oh, let me go out there so he doesn't overreact to this. And that's my feeling from diabetes. I was like, oh, she just got hit really hard in the knee. She'll be fine. And, and I rolled out there, and I was like, how's it going? And she's like, got these tears in the corner of her eye that she's just kind of holding back, and she's like, ooh, it hurts. And I was like, right? And the coach, who's just raising a normal girl in the world, he's like, let's get ice on it. Let's do this. And I was like, hold on, chill out. I'm like, Arden, what do you want to do? She goes, let me stand up and see if I can throw another pitch. And so she does, right? She finishes the inning. Then she bunts for a single at the bottom of the inning, comes back, pitches the top of the next inning before she looks over at me and kind of gives me the high sign like, hey, you know what? Let me get out of this. My knee's really starting to hurt. And a couple days later, she's at the doctor, and she's got this little hairline like fracture in her knee. Oh, and it heals fine, and she's fine. But at that point in her life, 12 years old, a girl weighs 85 pounds at the time, and she never thought like, let me stop. She was like, oh, this sucks, but I'll just keep going. And I genuinely believe that part of that is her personality, but part of that comes from diabetes. I really do think it does. It's amazing. But if you look deep enough, you can find something good in it. Now, I don't know if you can do the same with lupus or not. I mean, your description of it is, I'm going to be honest, fairly terrible. And it's scary to hear from the outside. Like, I don't know you and you're in Alaska, but if you were closer, I feel like I would hug you if we were nearby. I'd be like, God, Sean, I'm so sorry. But do you feel like that day to day, or do you handle it differently?
Yeah, I mean, every day is different, and every day I'm still learning about different things and different therapies. And I have a great set of doctors now, so I will fly back from Montana, where I have my rheumatologist, to also Baltimore, Maryland, where they have the Johns Hopkins Lupus Center. Okay. So I just go, just try to see a center of excellence and just try to stay on top of it. And a lot of it, I think with any chronic disease, now this is just an assumption, but a lot of it comes down to just your outlook. If you can create a positive outlook around it, and like what creates a positive outlook around me is being involved in the community, so type 1, and then also doing what I love, which is snowboarding. And that just mentally, that's just refreshing. It keeps me going. And like, yeah, things can always be scary regardless of the disease in the future when you've had it for a few years.
Sure.
Like type 1 can be scary. Lupus can be scary. But the important thing is for me and for anyone, is just to live right now in the present. And you're going to have bad days. But the bad days that you have, like by having that community and being able to talk to someone that has a chronic illness, it's going to get you through that. And that's going to be like with type 1 diabetes, that's the next best medicine to insulin.
Yeah.
And it's the only way I feel to be successful with living with a chronic disease is to have a sense of community.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sending Arden her lunchtime bolus. We were just chatting there for a second. You caught me at the very end of it. But anyway, we're doing a 9-unit extended bolus, 30% now, and the rest over an hour. In case anybody's interested, her blood sugar is 130. And so, listen, I can't agree with you enough, honestly. Because there's two thoughts here. One is, you need to live your best life today. Like, this is the life you have today. You need to make the most of it. If we're going to get hit by a car tomorrow, or my lupus is going to get worse, or my type 1's going to make my eyeballs fall out, or whatever it ends up being, we don't know what the future holds, but we do know the future's out there somewhere, and it's coming eventually. And so, you're an amazing example of although I think you're doing all this, just try to meet Selena Gomez. But that's my personal idea. Have you met her?
No, but it is. I do hope to meet her one day.
Yeah, I feel like you're the one that can work this out, Sean. But you're married, right?
Yeah, I am.
You've wasted that whole opportunity. But nevertheless, but I mean, seriously, like, you're an amazing example of this for type 1. Put the lupus aside for a second. Seriously, put the lupus aside for a second. You're in Alaska snowboarding with type 1. What are you using? You have a Dexcom?
Yeah, I have an Omnipod and a Dexcom.
Yeah, you've got the gear of the best stuff, in my opinion. That's what we use too. And so, you're out there with this. I mean, this little bit of technology flying down the side of a mountain on what appears to me to be a very tiny, like, surfboard. And so it doesn't seem. I mean, do you ever even stop and look at it like that? I guess you don't, right? Like, you just have a different attitude, and I think that's important for people to hear. Because I know how much I've seen the community be kind of bolstered just by the idea that my 13-year-old can play 4 or 5 softball games in a day and not have a problem. It's I think it's amazing for people to be able to see the things that they're most scared of are not just possible, but they're possible in a really big way. Like, we're not all going to go snowboarding in Alaska, but if you can snowboard in Alaska, my kid can definitely play soccer. You know what I mean? Like, if Chris Freeman can ski across Maine, which apparently he does, you know what I mean? Like, then my kid can play rec basketball on Saturday, or I can go to the gym as an adult and not feel worried. There is a way to manage these things and still do the things you want to do. How did you learn that management style? Like, how did you figure out how to do what you do without it causing you a real problem with your blood sugar? Or does it?
Well, I think that attitude that you spoke of right there, that was number one. I had to change my attitude to be like, okay, these are the cards I've been dealt. This is what I need. If I still want to be a pro athlete or an athlete or whatever that was, I just have to learn. And so I did as much research as I could. I reached out to as many people that had type 1 diabetes that I came across online and tried to gather information. And then I just started going to the gym. And I was so underweight because I had been misdiagnosed for so long that I would go to like the local YMCA like super early in the morning, right when they opened up, because there'd be less people, and I was just kind of ashamed that I looked like a skeleton. And I would just do all sorts of different exercises that I normally never would do. I'm not a swimmer, but I would get in the pool and I would start swimming laps so I could just learn how my body reacted to that sort of stress or that sort of exercise. And I would record it in a logbook. And I did this for I did this for a few years, even going into snowboarding competitions, recording days before a snowboard competition, recording everything that was going off my blood sugars every 2 hours through the night. If I was making any corrections, what those corrections were, if I was giving myself any insulin, what that insulin was, and then resetting my insulin pump to basically mimic how my body had been acting the days before. So I was very hands-on with it. And I would say that's the other big thing of advice I would give, is to just be extremely hands-on with diabetes. Test, and learn, or check, and learn how your body reacts in certain exercises or different climates or different environments.
Sean, that's amazing, because I say here on the podcast, I tell people, I'm like, look, nothing's a mistake, but you need experiences, and then you need to have the kind of the equation, like, I did this and this happened. Next time I'd like to see this happen, so I'll do this. Like, you have to, I always talk about like being in a fight. Like, if you're in a fist fight, you want to hit first, because then everything that happens afterwards you dictate, right? So if you make a decision with insulin, then I did this and this is what happened. But if you wait for diabetes to come at you, then you're forever covering your face and hoping not to get punched in the nose. And then nothing that happens to you is valuable, because you can't act on it later, because you don't know where it derived from. And you did that with exercise and how it affected your body, which is brilliant, by the way. How old are you now? I can't believe I didn't ask you that.
I'm 33.
Okay, so you've been at this for a bit now. So 13-ish, 14 years with diabetes and lupus, pretty much. But that's, and so anyway, so sometimes people know I'll say, like, if you're having a real problem figuring out, like, pre-bolusing is an example, sort of cheat and make the same lunch a couple days in a row. So at least you take out some of the factors and you can see what's going on. You did that, like, with exercise. So that's how you taught yourself how your body would react to certain to situations. That is so smart. Geez, Sean, I didn't know you were going to be this. This is a great interview. I was like, Sean, this is going to go like 20 minutes. Don't worry about it. I said, we'll yell about the hashtag a little bit. Right? I'll say, now you see me, hashtag, and then I'll get you out of here. And now I'm like, Sean's great. I was like, why are we not doing? We should have taken more time. Here's what I imagine. I could be completely wrong. There are magic elves that work at Dexcom. That's what I think. I don't know how scientific it is or possible, but Arden just started using the brand new Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor about 12 days ago. I'll have a comprehensive review for you coming up next week, but for now, the upgrade in the insertion process alone, you heard Kevin Sayer talk about it back when he was on the show a few weeks ago, but I've now seen it in person, and oh my God, is it easy. And if you believe my daughter, which I do because she's 13 and doesn't usually lie about things like this, not just painless, she didn't feel it. She didn't notice anything happen. We used it. It was crazy. We stuck on the thingy, and then we pushed the button, and then she turned back to me with this big look on her face and said, I didn't feel anything. Ain't gonna get better than that. Feeling nothing is pretty much the epitome of what I want to feel when I'm inserting something into my body. I mean, you get what I'm saying. But if I'm getting poked with... All right, let me try to clean this up. If you're going to put there's no good way to say this. If you're going to insert a continuous glucose monitor into me, I'd like to not feel it. And apparently, you're not going to. I really want you to go to dexcom.com/juicebox or click on the links in the show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com to contact Dexcom and to begin your journey with continuous glucose monitoring. And if you're already a customer and you want to upgrade to G6, it's very simple to do. Please contact them today to find out more. I'm talking about not just pain-free, literally no feeling. Nothing happens. It's like nothingness. On top of that, the accuracy is crazy good. We're having a great experience with it. I will tell you all more about it very soon. I just want to have some more time with it before I come to conclusions and share them all with you. Pretty responsible of me, don't you think? What are we hoping for people to do with the hashtag MA? Just put pictures out or to tell their story a little bit about multiple diagnosis, or what's your hope?
Yeah, so again, we're trying to develop that community because we know that there are plenty of people out there that are that are managing type 1 and other disease. And sometimes, for me too, I find like how you said, how do you wake up? What do you think about? I find a hard time to prioritize type 1 diabetes on some days.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can be like, oh, well, lupus or type 1 or whatever it may be is so much worse than this or that. But that's not fair to do to yourself. If you have any medical conditions, they're always serious.
Yeah.
And you need to figure out how to prioritize them equally and to be able to take care of yourself. And so for this month of May, where we're doing this, the hashtag Now You See Me, it's to basically allow people to come out, speak out about what it's like managing two diseases. Share that with others, because most likely there's people on the other end that are listening that are going through something similar or maybe even the exact same thing. And so we're asking people to, share their experience. Riding on Insulin is putting up a ton of content along with many of our partners around the world that are also putting up content. Share that content, just get it out there. And if people want to be more involved, they can donate to Riding on Insulin, which is ridingoninsulin.org, and just help spread that message of awareness, and let's bring to light,
Well, I mean, Sean, I was going to say it's incredibly important because you said something that we all believe about, how strong community is and how much it helped you when you found it. And if you have a multiple diagnosis, the community for that is obviously going to be smaller, but it's probably more important because you're dealing with these two things. And it is, I think this is a great idea because you're really encouraging people to get out into the world and be, a little more open about the things that they're dealing with, because they have probably plans and tricks and tips that they could share with each other too, or just good stories that would help buoy somebody who's just been diagnosed, the way it worked for you. I always feel badly about, I think it's not a very well-kept secret, but the type 2 community is not very strong or active, and there are I've had multiple conversations with dozens of different companies, and they all would like to see it, hey, wouldn't it be nice if there was more of a community? But you can't get people with type 2 in a big block to speak up, and the best people can guess is that they're embarrassed by it, and so they don't want to talk about it because of the stigma that's pretty unfairly attached to it, and this. I hope somebody does that for them, just the same as I hope that people step up, use this hashtag, and do the same for people living with multiple autoimmunes, because I think it's just really important to find people who understand, and maybe you can find a connection there that'll help you. So this is really cool.
It totally is. Yeah.
No, I appreciate this. I really do. And wow. Sean, you're doing a nice thing here from Alaska. So, all right, before I'm going to let you go in a minute, but tell me just real quick, what the hell are you doing in Alaska now? You're gonna ride a snowboard, or how do you not die riding a snowboard?
Practice.
Practice. Where do you practice something like that? I've never I'm going to tell you something. I'll tell you two things that'll knock your socks off. I've never had a cup of coffee in my entire life, and I've never been on skis. There's two things I don't think. And by the way, I've never seen Animal House. There's three things that most people don't believe, right? And so when I think of skiing, I think of skiing like being eaten by a shark. If I'm not in the ocean, a shark can't eat me. So if I'm not on skis, I can't run headlong into a tree going what I'm assuming is 1,000 miles an hour. So you said, how do you practice to snowboard? Where did you do that first?
I did that first in Southern California. So,
well, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly, right? Went to elementary school in Laguna Beach and ended up in the mountains. So, I learned in Southern California. It was not to extend this any further, but my brother passed away when I was in high school, and snowboarding became a coping mechanism for me. It was just a place where I found a closeness to him, was being up in the mountains, because I grew up in Southern California, and we had concrete backyards and all that. So I needed that open space to reflect and feel close to my brother and God and all that. So that's what really drove my snowboarding. And it just kind of all funneled out of control from there. I grew up in a soccer family. My father coached college soccer. And
that sounds terrible.
So I just kind of grew up in
a baseball family.
Sports world.
Yeah, when we're a baseball family, when you say soccer, I feel like you were like Dyfus should have stepped in and helped you. But no offense to people who like soccer, even though it's a god awful sport that doesn't seem to have any point. But anyway, Sean, we're going to name this episode "Sean Busby's Life is a Disaster," and yet he's still really upbeat.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm so sorry, and I know it's probably been a long time, but you were like, my brother passed away, and I was like, this poor guy. Like, have you ever been hit by a car? Has a kangaroo ever stolen your baby? What else has happened to you? Like, do you have, like, could you go on forever about, like, or is that it?
I've had crazy stories, but
no kidding.
Yeah, it definitely shapes who I became. Like, it was all a process I believe that I had to go through in my life, and in order to be able to face harder challenges in the future as well. And but yeah, I just got on the snowboarding, and then after type 1 diabetes, I got on to the backcountry side of snowboarding, and my goal was this backcountry snowboard all 7 continents, and to just kind of, I don't know, I think anyone that's an athlete, they're going to want to put more extreme challenges in front of them, and it's just something that kind of gives me a mission in my life, I guess.
Well, first of all, I couldn't agree with you more about going through tough things and that building for other stuff. I mean, I think that's a no-brainer. I think the most amazing thing you've said here today is that somewhere in South America there's snow. That might have gone by for most people, but what I've learned in the last 40 minutes is there's snow in South America somewhere, and I never considered that once in my life. I'm assuming it's on the top of a mountain, but
there's also snow in Africa.
See, you know, a lot of people in Africa listen to this podcast. I'm literally bowled over by that every time I see people downloading it. South Africa, all over the continent.
That's awesome.
It's very strange. But hey, what's up, Africa? I'm going to let you go, Sean, because I'm afraid you're going to tell me that the end of the world's coming and you know about it somehow. So, hey guys, I have some bad news. March 33rd. No, but seriously, you have a great sense of humor, which is why I feel comfortable joking with you, even though we don't know each other. But seriously, if the things you just said over this last however long this has been don't fill people with hope, then they're not listening correctly, because you are an amazing example of perseverance in the face of things that a lot of people, I think, would maybe run and hide from. And dude, that's just incredibly commendable. And then on top of it, you're out in the world sharing it with other people. So that's huge. So yeah, that's really amazing. And I appreciate you coming on and talking about it with me.
Yeah, well, thank you for this time and those kind words.
Absolutely. I'm going to stop the recording. Could you hold on 1 second?
Yep.
I stopped the recording to ask Sean for his address so I could send him a Bold With Insulin t-shirt, because I got to tell you what, that guy is bold. And so I did it. I had to send it to the top of a mountain, care of a polar bear. Isn't that amazing? None of that is true. But yet I feel like it will be. I feel like when it gets to the post office, wherever Sean is, there'll be a mailman, but he'll be a polar bear. It'll be a polar bear dressed as a mailman. And it'll be like, hello. And then they'll just like have like some like, it'll be him and a moose, and they'll be talking, and then they'll just like eat a penguin. I don't know why I think any of that. I also don't know why people live out in the cold. None of that makes sense to me. You know what does make sense to me? Thanking Omnipod and Dexcom for being sponsors of the Juicebox Podcast. It makes sense to me to say to you again, please click on the links in your show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com. Or if you have to type into the browser, I guess you could, myomnipod.com/juicebox or dexcom.com/juicebox. Thank you so much for listening, for leaving reviews on iTunes, for leaving reviews on Amazon for the new Amazon Alexa skill. You guys rock. Seriously. You're good peeps. I appreciate that. So this moose walks into a post office. He's got a penguin under his arm, and he says to the polar bear behind the counter, "Hey, you want to eat this penguin?" The polar bear looks at the moose and he says, "Nothing could stop me from eating this penguin. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night. I'm a polar bear post office worker. I'm hungry, And I am hungry. And I do want to eat that penguin, Mr. Moose. Thank you so much for bringing him into me. And we're going to make penguin soup out of him. And then I will share the soup with you, Mr. Moose. And the moose says, oh, you're so kind. Thank you for sharing the penguin soup with me. Postmaster Grizzly, I meant Polar Bear. Thank you so much. Why are you still listening to this? Why have you not prioritized your day and said, this guy is babbling into this microphone about some penguin and a moose, and I'm still listening? This is a reflection on you, not on me. Seriously. Oh my God, have you not stopped it yet? Push stop. Go to the next podcast. I haven't had anything to say for over 2 minutes. Why are you still here? Nothing's going to happen. It's not a Marvel movie. There's not going to be a cut scene at the end. This is it. It's over. I'm giving you permission to stop right now. Did you stop it? Are you still here? Did you just hear Basil snore like that? That was crazy. He's a snoring machine. Why are you still listening?